Representative Tim Burchett from Tennessee. Congressman Burchett, it's so good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Natasha.
Let's start with the Pentagon launching that new website. It does provide some declassified information on UFOs, including pictures and video, so the public can take a look. Now, you've said about the Pentagon smells dollars. What do you mean by that?
Well, since 1947, the Pentagon has denied that UFOs even exist. And now all of a sudden they're saying they exist. And it's ironic that it's right after Chuck Schumer has said that he's going to put something in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, to in fact screen photos that if they have any national defense or national security implications, that they won't be able to put them out. So what they've done is put another layer of government, more dollars. You know, the Pentagon loses $1 billion a year easily. They've never passed an audit. At some points, they've had 60% of their military of their assets unaccounted for. Anywhere else, and you'd be in handcuffs. What do we do at the Pentagon? We reward them with more tax dollars every year. So this, to me, shows nothing. Y'all as journalists and me as a congressman, I just want transparency. Yeah. I want them to release the files that they have.
And I know you've called for that over and over again. It sounds like ultimately you don't feel that this website will be useful or reveal anything we haven't seen before.
No, ma'am. As a matter of fact, the stuff that's on it already is old stuff. You know, they denied that the Tic Tac videos even existed. You can Google Tic Tac video on YouTube and watch them. And they denied they even existed, and then they were leaked, and they said they were fakes. And then they had the audio of the pilots, and they turned out to be some of the best pilots in the world. And they were forced to have to come forward with that, saying then. So I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. I've said before, I think the Pentagon is mostly a bunch of war pimps. All they're doing is selling war, and we just roll out the cash for them. And it's unfortunate.
I want to pick up on what you said about transparency a moment ago, because since these hearings, you've been saying, just bring me transparency. So what do you think the important next step is? What concrete step do you want to see?
I would like to see the files released to the American public. You know, you're talking about in Washington, D.C., that won't even release the Kennedy assassination files. Nobody's even alive in any of those that dealt with that assassination or that was involved in it. Yet with these UFOs, it's almost a weekly occurrence. I talk to pilots all the time. We're blocked from talking to pilots. They are basically they'll be reprimanded if they do come forward. I had an amendment to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Reauthorization Act, and to just say if a commercial pilot spots a UFO or UAP or some kind of aerial phenomena, that in the report that they make to the FAA, that they have to issue that report to Congress. Well, guess what? The intelligence community, not the committee, the community, told Congress they were uneasy with that. So the gutless bunch in Congress, both parties, decided not even to hear the amendment that I had proposed. So if they don't exist, they sure are spending a hell of a lot of time and money and effort to stop us from seeing their files. I suspect there's greed, there's money, there's reverse engineering, there's all kinds of things that are involved in this. And until we get some transparency, we'll never get to the bottom of it.
And Congressman, you've said that you are 100% sure the federal government is covering up documents about UFOs. In your view, what is the government's motive for a lack of transparency on UAPs?
That's a good question. There's a compartmentalization of this. You have an incredible, in these videos you're watching, there's no heat signature. These things are defying any kind of, we had the pilots in our testimony swear that these things were, there's nothing on the planet Earth or any of our enemies or allies have that could do anything like this. Yet there's an energy source in there that doesn't put off a heat signature. Could you imagine what that would do to the Pentagon? They would be out of business, for one. We wouldn't need to be fighting these worthless oils over a barrel of oil in the Middle East. We could heat our homes in the winter. Poor folks could stay cool in the summer. We might be able to power our automobiles and other things with this energy source. Yet it's, to me, there's something else aloof, ma'am. And it's generally in Washington, D.C., it's about greed, it's about power, and it's about control. And you combine all those things into this, and I suspect there's some truth in that. And the fact that what they've done, a lot of it, if you notice the trail of questions I gave towards the end, I went down the rabbit hole of this thing's been passed off to some industries that we cannot FOIA them. We cannot freedom of information them. So they in fact pass it on to a business. It's compartmentalized within there. They can reverse engineer some of this stuff. And there again, if you came up with this kind of technology, and you put it out piece by piece, you can't imagine the billions and billions of dollars that it would generate. So there's a lot going on with this, and I suspect we will never get fully to the bottom of it because of it.
If the United States ever discovers evidence of alien life somewhere out there, well, one scientist with the agency says yes. During a recent event in New York City, Michelle Fowler, Assistant Director for Science Communication at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, said that the agency has had talks about what happens if the James Webb Space Telescope finds evidence of extraterrestrial life. And new this morning, exclusive News Nation polling finds that a majority of Americans think that UFOs are linked to intelligent alien life, with 18% saying it's very likely the two are in fact related. Here to weigh in is theoretical physicist Avi Loeb, director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard Center for Astrophysics. Professor, thanks for being with us. Once again, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So are you surprised that NASA is having these kinds of conversations? And what do you think the plan in place is if they do, in fact, find evidence of alien UFO life out there?
Well, I'm glad to hear that they are open to that possibility. Unfortunately, they have not pursued it very diligently. There aren't many funds allocated to the search for technological signatures. It's a small budget that is allocated for that. Most of the attention is given to searching for microbes, either on Mars or signatures in the atmospheres of distant planets. And that's what the statement refers to. It would be much more interesting to actually check if there are any packages in our backyard, any objects that arrive there, which is pretty much what I'm pursuing in recent years.
And you and I, Professor, we've been talking on this show for the last 3 months about this story, but I don't think I've asked you this question. I thought of it this morning. For most of us outsiders, when we hear alien life, we do think of those little green men that have been depicted in cartoons, movies. But for you, sir, when you hear alien, what's the vision that comes to mind of what you think that truly might be and might look like?
Well, I'm trying to be practical. They may be green out there, but what would visit us, the encounter, will likely be with technological gadgets, because the trip takes very long, millions to billions of years. And biology was not designed to survive that long in the harsh conditions of space. And so what I expect is some gadget. Now, it could be space trash, the way that our probes would appear in millions or billions of years. They will not be functional anymore. And you will see an object burning up in the atmosphere that happened to be some spacecraft that is not working anymore. The second possibility is that it's still working with some artificial intelligence. It has a brain, which is technological. And that would be, of course, quite amazing to find, because we could get inspired. We could import these technologies. We could go to space ourselves by figuring out how they do it. And so that's what I'm hoping to encounter. But you see, when we imagine things, it's based on our experience. I don't think it's a good practice to prepare for a date by looking at the mirror.
Yeah, well, it would be amazing, and they could be green. You heard it here. And one last question for you, sir. We did take a poll. According to the most recent News Nation poll, a majority of Americans, 53%, believe that intelligent life does exist on other planets. Do you think that NASA's apparent willingness to be open about these conversations about the potential for extraterrestrial life is because the majority of Americans now believe it? And did you ever expect this day to come?
Yeah, I do believe that we should attend to the public's interest, because the public funds NASA, funds science. And it's irresponsible of the scientific community to dismiss it altogether, given that the U.S. military and intelligence agencies are talking about it. There was a hearing in the House of Representatives about it. And moreover, we just went to the Pacific Ocean and found the molten droplets from the surface of an object that came from outside the solar system. Yeah. So altogether, I think it's very exciting times. I didn't expect it, but I welcome it very much.
Yeah, and it's only going to get more interesting from here, I feel. Professor, thanks for joining us once again.
The main news newspapers and news portals online had it, for reasons that I can understand. We were on this story, well, the thick end of a year ago. Daily Mail put it this way: scientists claim they've recovered material that originated outside of our solar system for the first time in history. Harvard physicist Professor Avi Loeb said early analysis of metal fragments his team had recovered from the Pacific in June suggests they came from interstellar space. That's the area between the stars. The remnants came from a meteor-like object that crashed off the coast of Papua New Guinea in 2014, which Professor Loeb is not ruling out could have been fragments of an alien craft even. The team found about 700 tiny metallic spheres during the expedition, and the 57 analysed contained compositions that do not match any natural or man-made alloys. Avi Loeb has been a very busy man doing interviews this week with all kinds of media, so thank you very much for giving me some time tonight. Avi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
What is it, do you think you found?
Well, we found the molten droplets from the surface of the object that entered the atmosphere on about a decade ago and was moving extremely fast, not bound to the sun. Looked like it came from outside the solar system, and it also had material strength tougher than iron meteorites. So the question arose as to whether it's made of some artificial materials. Maybe it's a Voyager-like meteor. Imagine our own spacecraft Voyager colliding with another planet far away. A billion years from now, it would look like a meteor of unusual strength and also high speed. And that's what we went to look for. What was the composition, the materials that made this object? And amazingly, we found those molten droplets, spirals, roughly the size of a grain of sand, millimeter in size, on the ocean floor, about 2 kilometers deep. We found 700 of them, brought them back to Harvard University, and then analyzed their composition. And what we found is that the elements they are made of have concentrations that cannot be found in the solar system. For example, beryllium, lanthanum, uranium are at abundances of several hundreds times what you find in solar system materials. So that's an independent confirmation that the object came from outside the solar system. And the next question is whether it was artificial or natural. And for that, we, for example, want to find a bigger piece of the object in the next expedition so we can tell the difference between a rock and the technological gadget.
Now, I'm guessing one of the ways that these could have been formed is by some kind of massive collision. You know, the cosmos is full of things colliding and exploding and burning out and coming to life. So that's one possibility. Or the other possibility is that somebody could have made it for some reason, perhaps as part of a craft, whatever. How are you going to be able to tell which of those it might be?
Well, so indeed, the most likely natural origin we mentioned in the paper is basically a magma ocean, a lava planet where the rock is molten. And actually, the Earth started this way, but you need that magma ocean to survive for a very long period of time so that some elements sink towards the iron core of the planet, and then the other elements left behind make up the crust of the planet. And actually, those are the elements we see enhanced in those spheres. So that's one possible scenario. But to get the magma ocean to last for a long time, indeed, you need it to be impacted a lot, as you mentioned, but also it could be close to the star. And the challenge is really that you need 10 to the power 23 such objects that are roughly a ton in mass produced per star. And that's a lot. They add up to about an Earth mass. So just think about it. You need basically the whole mass of the Earth to be in a magma ocean that is being sprinkled into tiny objects, each of them 1 ton, and there are 10 to the power 23 of them shot into interstellar space. That's difficult to arrange per star. The other possibility, of course, is that it was artificially made, and elements like lanthanum are being used in semiconductors, and it's possible that that's the origin. And uranium, we all know, is used for fission as an energy source. And And then beryllium that was also enhanced could be just a flag of interstellar travel, because beryllium is produced by spallation, the breakup of heavier nuclei by cosmic rays.
Right, so that's like a rolling stone gathering moss on the way. That's something gets picked up on the way.
Exactly. So we still need to figure out what this pattern of abundances of elements means, but it's a very exciting news in the sense that we confirm, independent of the speed of the object, which was extremely high, we also confirmed based on composition that it came from outside the solar system.
Very exciting. Even if it hasn't been made by something, some intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that we've got
by
it,
the way,
and there it is. You know, I know you've been displaying this, but can you just hold that up a little higher for us, just to see? And there it is in suspension.
Well, this is what you see is basically the volcanic ash that we collected with the magnets on the sled. So most of the material was volcanic ash from Earth, but then inside of it were these tiny spherules. So we needed to filter out the black powder and get down to the bigger particles that we analyzed with a mass spectrometer and found this composition that I mentioned. And those were found only along the meteor path, not very far away. We went also to control regions where we didn't find them.
One question I've never asked you and should have asked you before in the many conversations we've had about this. How did you know where to look?
So first, the U.S. government satellites provided the fireball site, and they gave it within 11 kilometers on a side. So there was an error box of the Department of Defense where the fireball was seen by government satellites. And then we narrowed down that path of the meteor, the likely path, based on seismometer data from a Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. Basically, the seismometer detected the blast wave, the sound from the explosion, and knowing the speed of sound, we could tell, based on the delay, how far it happened. And so that gave us a strip, which is roughly 1 kilometer wide and 10 kilometers long, where the meteor must have passed, and that's where we started searching. And we crisscrossed that region with the ship. So we did it 26 times back and forth in 2 weeks between June 14th and 28th.
And as the Americans say, you hit pay dirt with that. You actually got what you were looking for and have now brought it back, which is, you know, as we say, hugely excited. Not everybody agrees with you, as you know, Avi, and there was a guy quoted in the Independent newspaper in the UK here, and I'm just going to run this past you. I know you take all of these criticisms in good part. It's part of science and part of life. I get people who throw brickbats at me. Quotes. Steve Desch, astrophysicist, Arizona State University, said people are sick of hearing about Avi Loeb's wild claims. That was when you revealed details of the search. It's polluting good science. Now, there are a few people saying that kind of thing. What would you say to them?
Well, when he said that, he didn't actually see the data. I'm just following the method of science, which is collecting the materials and then analyzing them in the laboratory. That's the way science works. I don't understand why he calls himself a scientist if he's opposed to the scientific method, which is collecting evidence, analyzing it, and reporting the results in a scientific paper. You know, any issues he has with that should be discussed with his therapist. That's not my problem. I'm just following the scientific method, and you know that's the way I did it with more than 1,000 scientific papers in my career. And by the way, I'm a scientist. I do the work of science. Many of these critics are bloggers or popularizers of science who are not practicing science. You know, the situation is similar to commentators that look at a soccer match and tell the players how to pass the ball. They are not really, they haven't really published a scientific paper for a decade, many of those critics. And so I'm doing the work of science, talking about it. And if they have a problem with that, they're not scientists.
Well, indeed, and that's why you started the Galileo project, which is designed to look in a scientific method for evidence of perhaps life beyond us, which is something, again, we've talked about a lot. A quick thought, if you would, about what Arrow, did this week. CNN reported it this way. The U.S. Department of Defense has launched a website intended to be a one-stop shop for publicly available information on unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs. This site will also serve as an information hub of resolved UAP cases, including photos and videos, as soon as they're declassified, according to a Pentagon spokesman. This is part of ARO, the All Domain Anomalous Research Offices, organizations' remit. Is this going to help, do you think, or is this just going to bombard us with information, some of which may not be useful?
No, I do think it will help, and I think it's a result of the U.S. Congress showing more interest in the reports. And altogether, it means that the item of unidentified anomalous phenomena is now becoming more at the forefront of the Pentagon. So it will be managed by a higher-level administrator, the deputy, and so I think, first of all, it will bring more transparency to the information they're getting. And second, it implies that they will deal with it more seriously, because David Grush claimed that the U.S. government has possession of materials, and they have programs that are aimed at the retrieval and reverse engineering of these materials. So if that is true, of course, it was hidden from view for a while. We should know about it. And you might see this act as the first step in that direction.
But the interesting phrase there was, once it is declassified. So
there was a whole neighborhood who saw them for about a 2-hour period.
A 1950s amateur sketch of egg-shaped flying discs over the Baltimore night sky, still unexplained decades later. Or this black and white photo from 1969 of what looks like an alien spaceship straight out of a sci-fi movie. It was later determined to be a rare kind of cloud. News Nation getting an exclusive look at how once secret government records are being made available to the world.
Things that we cannot explain.
As Congress and citizens around the nation are taking a renewed interest in UFOs. So far this year, the National Archives has digitized tens of thousands of pages related to UFOs. They start in stacks like this, then it's off to the lab, where employees prep the materials, get them ready for the camera, and then onto your computer screen.
What we'll do is we'll place the object on the table and basically take an image of it.
Project Blue Book was a U.S. Air Force program from 1947 to 1969, which was responsible for receiving, documenting, and investigating UFO reports.
Every time you play a film, it's at risk of damage.
And the famous Roswell incident, transformed from the original film, only available at an archives facility just outside D.C., to this digital video that can now be played anywhere. The once clandestine Air Force video supporting the official government conclusion that the 1947 discovery of debris in New Mexico was from Air Force testing of covert weather balloons. Now, the tens of thousands of government UFO records expected to all be available online by 2024.
The first step was to identify the records in our holdings that relate to UFOs and to determine the scope. With that, to begin the digitization of the records that were not already digitized. Our goal is to have those records digitized by the end of this year.
Defense analyst and contributor to The Hill. He also served as an analyst with the U.S. Department of State and worked at the Department of Defense. Merrick, this new government website is up and uploading previously unreleased videos and documents. Is this a good first step when so many Americans believe the government's hiding something?
Absolutely. And, you know, for decades, the government has ridiculed UFO sightings and the topic in general, and has been evasive at best on the topic. So, yes, this is absolutely a step in the right direction. And what I find very interesting when you go through these old documents is the parallels and the connections to what we are hearing and seeing today from the government. And that is something that hopefully through this process, it's going to be easier to review these files. They were kind of a disorganized mess in the past. So they were declassified, but they were really kind of spread out in different corners, and it was very hard to analyze and access these documents. So this is absolutely a significant step in the right direction. What
do you mean about those parallels? What were you just referencing there?
I'm so glad you asked, Elizabeth. So we heard very recently from the director of the government's UFO office. He's made some really intriguing comments about the most commonly reported UFO, and that is a silver metallic orb. And the director of this office is on record. He says publicly, we have seen these all over the world making very interesting apparent maneuvers. And if you go through these old reports, and especially in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the number of reports from highly credible individuals, from multiple witnesses, very frequently reference silver metallic spheres, orbs, or round objects. And that is just scratching the surface, but the parallels are intriguing, and I really hope that this effort makes it easier for folks who have an interest in this and an analytic mind to go look back and see, again, the match between the current reporting and the previous reporting.
I'm curious, as somebody like yourself who worked at the Department of State and the Department of Defense, do you agree with the 63% of Americans who say there's more that's being kept secret from the rest of the public?
Absolutely. 100%. I want to caveat that. I think the poll was actually about extraterrestrial life. So, that's a squishy issue. If you
no, there's two different parts of the poll. There's two different parts of the poll. 63% think Americans are the government is keeping something secret from Americans, and then another significant percentage thinks that these UFOs are related to extraterrestrial life.
So I'll answer, do I think that the government is hiding or concealing information about UFOs? 110%. Absolutely. We know that because they've only released, I think, 4 or 5 videos, and evidence and data is very hard to come by. And we know they have dozens, if not hundreds, of videos taken with the infrared cameras on fighter jets, satellite imagery. We know they're sitting on that stuff. We know that information is classified. We know exactly how and under what authorities they're classifying it. So absolutely, they're hiding stuff. They're not putting this stuff out. And I want to just quickly make one comment on that. Somewhat distressing in the past. If you look back through history, the government has been very cagey and has been only open and transparent about cases that have been solved. And what I just saw recently is that the government only plans to release information on cases that have been resolved. That is a problem. We want to see, we don't care about weather balloons. We want to see the highly anomalous cases that they don't have any clue about. And it takes individuals leaking. What we're looking at on the screen here in the B-roll, this is leaked to the New York Times. That's the only way this stuff comes out. And this is highly anomalous stuff. So I do have concerns about what I'm seeing and a potential repeat of history, but let's see the interesting stuff. Let's not see the weather balloons and the drones.
Yeah, that's been the concern from the very beginning about this program. They were going to release and upload onto this website all this unclassified document and video evidence, which begs the question, where's the classified stuff? And by the way, how much of this is classified versus declassified?
That is $1 million question. What I can say is if you go on YouTube right now, you can find quite literally almost hours of footage from infrared cameras on jets. So when they say that information is classified because sources and methods, it's absolute nonsense. There's so much more that they can release, and their excuse does not hold up in this case. The government's excuse absolutely does not hold up.
All right, Merrick von Rennenkampf, to be continued. Thanks so much for coming on the show tonight.